Hello everyone, today we read the first paragraph of the first chapter of the first book of the Vom Kriege. It's a very simple text, there is not much to read through the lines, nevertheless it's very important as von Clausewitz uses this paragraph as a general introduction to the content of the first chapter. It's very short by the way, so we're going to read it also in German. So, Erstes Buch über die Natur des Krieges. So, literally, first book on the nature of war. Erstes Kapitel, was ist der Krieg? Chapter 1, what is war? And then Einleitung, so introduction. Wir denken die einzelnen Elemente unseres Gegenstandes, dann die einzelnen Teile oder Glieder derselben und zuletzt das Ganze in seinem inneren Zusammenhange zu betrachten, also von einfachen zu zusammengesetzten vorzuschreiten. Aber es ist hier mehr als irgendwo nötig, mit einem Blick auf das Wesen des Ganzen anzufangen, weil hier mehr als irgendwo mit den Teilen auch zugleich immer das Ganze gedacht werden muss. So this is it. So it basically says we propose to consider first the single elements of our subject, then each other branch or part, and last of all the whole, in all its relations, therefore to advance from the simple to the complex. But it is necessary for us to commence with a glance at nature of the whole, because it is particularly necessary that in the consideration of any of the parts their relation to the whole should be kept constantly in view. So here, as you understand, it's very simple, but nevertheless it's important what he's saying, because here von Clausewitz is introducing us to essentially the method and also the logic that he will be following to his explanation, because he states here openly that the single elements of the subject will be considered first, as he calls them, each branch or part, and only at the end, so last of all, the whole, as the ensemble, in all its relations. Therefore, he says, to advance from the simple to the complex. This is very important because this is really how von Clausewitz follows the whole thing. He starts from certain, principles, assumptions, elements that basically all have a logical connection that brings to a more complex system. So yeah, he really starts from very simple parts. Von Clausewitz is also very scientifical in his mind. He proceeds without ambiguities. He goes step by step and forms these bonds between. And then his theory evolves into something more complex. This is very important to bear in mind, because initially you might say, well, the single concepts sound really the single elements sound pretty, relatively simple. Of course, first of all, they're extremely meaningful. You don't have to give them for granted as well. And I guess that most of the misinterpretations of von Clausewitz, of the Clausewitzian thought fundamentally start from the I would say more than the miscomprehension, but kind of the refusal, often dictated by arbitrary moral stance, I would say, of these fundamental assumptions, of these principles. Nevertheless, those are, kind of the most important ones, because first of all, if you don't accept them, you can't follow Clausewitzian theory. At least you're going to think it's not correct or it's not realistic. You're wrong. I can tell you from the beginning. Of course, I don't want to force you into this towards this orientated towards von Clausewitz has to be understood. You can't really accept him blindly just because he's von Clausewitz. I know it would be word in the sense that objectively what he says is valid at that point, but nevertheless it's something you have to absorb and to understand fundamentally. And it's not. Um, I wouldn't say it's easy, because that's basically it takes a great willing to understand. Not much a great difficulty to understand, because it's not difficult. In fact, as he says, he starts from the simple. So these single statements are kind of easy, but it's this kind of easiness that you'd say, well, no, it's not like that. But you're not prone to that. I mean, at least personally, reading him, he never gave me that impression. On the contrary, I have always kind of, I don't know why, but always been kind of very open, very receptive of Clausewitzian thought. But aside from my, relative understanding, of course, that I'm not an expert, but I assume that there are people who have difficulties, I repeat, moral difficulties to accept what he's saying. And not because it sounds very controversial, but just because, I don't know, people like to have their own opinions, and that they know best, and then they don't listen much. And von Clausewitz has to be listened to. And even by reading him, you should kind of stop on those elements. Next episode, we will, for example, look at definition of war. And you'll see how it's relatively simple. It's not actually even the most famous phrase that the war is just the continuation of politics by other means. It's something much more elementary, but at the in this sense also much more revealing, and telling, and simple that you accept. So if you understand what he's saying, and we will see what he will define war as, you will I advise you to reflect on it, and to reflect it especially in the this is valid for every kind of definition he gives, but that on war is specifically important because it's something that touches you personally. I guess that many people who start reading von Clausewitz or have heard about him and they kind of know their importance, think that he's just one of the many great thinkers that have this, as he calls them by themselves, these abstruse definitions of war. He instead states the whole opposite, and this is already how you get acquainted to the genius, to the fact that his definitions on war are extremely simple, because that's what, and of other elements that are, because that's where he starts from, with those simple assumptions that, however, evolve. And this evolution is very difficult, because at the beginning you can even learn by heart Clausewitzian quotes fundamentally in definitions and so on, but it's never gonna be enough. If you want to understand Clausewitzian theory, you have to go on through all these logical steps that he makes, and observing from how these relatively few principles, how however the system basically evolves and becomes increasingly complex. So this is very fascinating, because at a certain point you lose track of the whole thinking, not because it's vague or it's imprecise at all, but because step by step, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter, these connections grow incredibly complex. And they do not grow complex, in fact, because von Clausewitz is making it complex. They grow complex because von Clausewitz is describing exactly the complexity of war in the way it really is. And you can't stop just to certain elements to understand the whole system, the whole theory. You have to follow. This is the reason why fundamentally the Clausewitzian theory has to be studied, why the Vom Kriege should be studied, and not just read, because by just reading it you can, it's surely an interesting read, and reading it is better than not even picking the book up, but it's still not enough. You should be focusing on on several concepts. And by the way, the whole theory is expressed by the Vom Kriege is extremely as we will see, there are certain kind of not of incongruences fundamentally, but there are certain definitions that sometimes are repeated in different ways, and this is not a mistake or a rethinking of the concept, but simply, making you understand the same concept from different perspectives and relatively to what that specific topic of the whatever it is, the paragraph of the chapter, or even the same book or the whole work is really about. I say this because it happened to me in the past to study certain things from the Vom Kriege, and I used the digitalized version, for which I was essentially inserting the key with a certain word because I wanted to find it in the whole work and kind of drawing these logical connections, and from that it was very useful. Obviously, it's not really the best approach, because in theory you should read the whole work and study the whole work thoroughly, so you can't just pick the single words as if you were at a supermarket and just getting what you like. But nevertheless, even at that point, exactly because of this reason, you understand how complex the whole system is, because even a single concept, a single word has many implications when it's confronted with other other words, other concepts, and you have to be able to understand this logical connection. Well, here from Clausewitz is essentially telling us pretty straight, much more straightforward way that I could ever be, what his method is simply like. And then it says, in fact, so he's just stated that he will proceed from the simple to the complex. However, he says, it is still necessary for us to commence with a glance at the nature of the whole. This is also very important in von Clausewitz. We've seen it in other things he wrote in the previous videos I made about his introduction, his foreword, the note slash Nachricht, that fundamentally, even though this method passing from the simple to the complex is always kind of the leitmotif of the Vom Kriege, still we are supposed to start pretty clearly with a as he calls him, in fact, is glance of the nature of the whole, that has never had to be forgotten, not even for a moment. In fact, he says, because it is particularly necessary that in the consideration of any of the parts, their relation to the whole should be kept constantly in view. So this is important because it's not, I mean, I don't know how to explain it properly, but it's not that von Clausewitz, it's as if he made a little bit back and forth. Von Clausewitz, as we have seen, uses a lot of metaphors, a lot of reflection, so he usually gives you this definition, and then he makes an example, and then this is always, obviously I'm making it simple, it's even more complex than this, but it's always meant to make you go back and forth from the simple to the complex, to the detail, to the whole, fundamentally, and this is part of a unique system, fundamentally, that you have always to be able to relate to throughout all the whole explanation. So this is why it is very, very important, I repeat it all the times, to really study it, to take note, to keep in mind, to repeat, to memorize, because if you don't do it, you're gonna miss fundamentally you're losing the plot, and this is bad, of course. So this is simply it. I wanted to say just this, and next time, wherever I will start this, we will see other paragraphs. The next ones are kind of there is the second one of the definition of war, then there is one of the utmost use of force. It's a bit longer, but they're relatively. This first part is the chapters are relatively brief. Excuse me, the paragraphs are relatively brief because of this this simple, relatively simple, which are not actually, if you take them into consideration as such. But you know that will lead you, however, progressively to the complexity of the system. So this is pretty much it. So now I haven't, as many of you have, as some of you at least, some of you have always also freaked out because I didn't. I know it by fact. Excuse me, because I didn't post for 1 week, but it was in vacation. Now I'm back. I will start making history videos as well. But as you know, we'll keep going on with this, especially in next weeks. Maybe I will have less time to prepare history videos, but I will keep making them. So we will go on with this in parallel as well. So it's gonna be mixed. This can be interesting. I hope it's not a problem for you. I've kind of received a positive reaction from my decision to start reading the Vom Kriege on Schwerpunkt, and I think that also my history videos are long enough to leave you enough, to watch all the time. Substantially, I speak more than you can listen as on average, so I guess that everybody's happy about, even if I add something else, which is definitely interesting. I mean, at least for me, the Vom Kriege is like the Bible in practice, so it's very, very important. So I cut it short. I just hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channels. To my channel, only one for now. If you're interested in my upcoming contents, and for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time.